I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about it before you answer. How many times this week alone, did you explain yourself to someone who had already made up their mind about you? How many times did you justify your decision to someone who never asked for your opinion in the first place? How many times did you go back and forth, defending your choices, your lifestyle, your dreams, to someone who was never going to understand them anyway? I'm going to tell you something today that might be the most liberating thing you've ever heard. You don't owe anyone an explanation. Not your family. Not your friends. Not the people watching your life from a distance, waiting for you to fail. Anyone. Now, before you misunderstand me, because I know some of you already are, I am not talking about arrogance. I'm not talking about being closed off to wisdom or counsel. There is a difference between receiving wise counsel and standing in a courtroom every day of your life, trying to defend your existence to people who were never qualified to judge you in the first place. That's what I want to talk about today. Because I have watched gifted people, extraordinarily gifted people, shrink themselves down to nothing. Not because they lacked ability, not because they lacked opportunity, but because they spent so much energy explaining themselves that they had nothing left to actually become themselves. Explanation is expensive. It costs you time. It costs you energy. It costs you confidence. And worst of all, it costs you clarity. Because the moment you start trying to justify your vision to someone who can't see it, you start to doubt whether you can see it yourself. So today, I want to walk you through something. I want to show you why you keep explaining yourself, what it's actually costing you, and how to stop, permanently. Let's start at the root. Why do we explain ourselves in the first place? It feels like the right thing to do. It feels respectful. Feels humble. We've been taught, by our families, by our culture, by every social system we grew up inside, that we need to justify our choices to the people around us. And when we were children, that was appropriate. A child needs to explain themselves. A child needs oversight and guidance and correction. That is natural. That is necessary. But something happens for many people. They grow up physically, but they never leave the psychological courtroom of their childhood. They still operate as though every decision they make requires the approval of the people around them before it becomes valid. And so they explain. Endlessly. Exhaustingly. I'm starting a business because. I'm leaving that relationship because. I'm choosing not to go to university because. I'm moving to a new city because. And here is what nobody tells you about that pattern. The explaining isn't for them. It's for you. Let that sit for a moment. When you explain yourself compulsively, when you feel that anxious pull to justify your choices before anyone even questions them, you are not trying to convince the other person. You are trying to convince yourself. The explanation is evidence of internal doubt. And this is why it never works. Because no matter how many times you explain, no matter how clearly you lay it out, no matter how logical your case is, if you haven't settled the decision inside yourself, no external validation will ever be enough. You'll explain to one person and feel temporarily relieved. Then you'll explain to another, and another. And you'll keep going back, seeking approval, seeking validation, seeking someone to tell you that it's okay. Because the person whose approval you actually need is the one looking back at you in the mirror. Here's the other side of this. Some of you aren't explaining because you doubt yourself. Some of you are explaining because you were raised in an environment where you had to, where your choices were scrutinized, where your instincts were overridden, where the people around you, The people who were supposed to support you consistently communicated through words or through silence that your judgment couldn't be trusted. And so you learn to preempt the criticism. You learn to get ahead of the disapproval by explaining first, by justifying first, by making your case before anyone asked you to. That was a survival strategy. At the time, it served you. But you are not in that environment anymore. And that strategy, the one that kept you safe then, is the very thing holding you back now. Because the world you are trying to build your future inside does not reward people who spend their energy explaining. It rewards people who move. I want to shift your perspective on something. Most people think that explaining yourself makes you look thorough, considerate, mature. But I want to show you what it actually communicates. When you explain yourself, when you go out of your way to justify a decision that nobody asked you about, you are sending a signal. That signal says, I am not sure about this, and I need you to confirm it for me. Think about the people in your life who carry the most authority, the ones whose presence commands respect before they even open their mouths, the ones who walk into a room and something shifts. Have you ever noticed that those people don't explain themselves very much? They make decisions. They communicate clearly. They don't stand there and defend their choices to people who didn't ask. They don't follow up a decision with a paragraph about why they made it. They don't send long messages justifying their position. They decide. And they move. And there's a reason that carries weight. Because confidence, real confidence, not arrogance, not performance. Real confidence is communicated not just by what you say but by what you don't say. When you over-explain, you are inadvertently telling the world that their opinion of your decision is more important than the decision itself. You are handing power to the observer. You are making their reaction the verdict on your choice. And people can feel that. Even when they can't articulate it, they feel it. And they respond to it. Not always consciously, but they begin to treat your decisions the way you treat them, with uncertainty, with negotiation, with the assumption that your choices are open to debate. Now, consider the alternative. You make a decision. You communicate it simply. You don't attach an apology to it. You don't follow it with a list of reasons. You just say it, and then you let it stand. Something changes in how people receive that. Not always immediately, but over time. The person who doesn't over-explain trains the people around them to take their decisions seriously. Because if you treat your own choices as though they're self-evident, as though they require no defense, others begin to treat them the same way. But there's something even deeper here than how other people perceive you. It's about what over-explaining does to you internally. Every time you explain yourself, every time you lay out your case to someone who didn't ask, you are engaging with a silent assumption. The assumption that you need permission. And I want you to understand how corrosive that assumption is. Because every time you operate from it, every time you explain before you move, you are reinforcing in your own nervous system the belief that your choices are subject to external approval, that they are not fully yours until someone else signs off on them. And that belief, left unchallenged, will quietly govern every significant decision of your life. It will cause you to hesitate at precisely the moments that require boldness. It will cause you to shrink at precisely the moments that require expansion. It will cost you your destiny. Not because someone took it from you, because you kept handing it back. Now let me talk about the people on the other side of this. Because not all explanation is the same. I want to draw a clear distinction here. Because wisdom requires precision. There are people in your life worth talking to. People who have walked a road you're trying to walk. People who have demonstrated through their own life that they have earned the right to speak into yours. People who have your genuine best interest at heart, not their comfort, not their preference, not their idea of who you should be, but your actual flourishing. Those people exist. And when they speak, you should listen. Carefully, humbly, without defensiveness. That is not the kind of explaining I'm telling you to stop. I'm talking about the other kind. I'm talking about explaining yourself to people who are not on your level and have no intention of getting there, who have already decided who you are and are not genuinely open to any evidence that challenges that decision. I'm talking about explaining yourself to people who ask questions that aren't really questions. They're criticisms wearing question marks. Why would you do that? Don't you think that's a bit risky? What are people going to say? Are you sure you're ready for that? These are not inquiries. They are invitations to doubt yourself. And every time you accept the invitation, every time you sit down and begin to construct your defense, you are playing a game you cannot win. Because here's the truth about those conversations. You will never explain your way into someone else's belief in you. Read that again. You will never explain your way into someone else's belief in you. Belief doesn't come from explanation. It comes from demonstration. People don't believe in you because you gave them a convincing argument. They believe in you because they watched you. They watched you try and fail and get back up. They watched you commit to something over time. They watched you become the evidence. Explanation asks for belief before the evidence exists. Most people, even people who love you, are not wired to give that. Not because they're bad people. Because they're human people. Humans believe what they see, not what they're told. So stop trying to explain your vision to people who haven't seen the evidence yet. Go create the evidence. And here is something I want you to really hear. Some of the people you keep explaining yourself to, some of them don't want to understand. And I know that's a hard thing to accept when it's someone close to you. But comfort requires honesty, and honesty requires this. There are people in your life for whom your success is inconvenient. Not because they're evil, not because they hate you, but because your growth exposes their stagnation. Because your decision to change raises uncomfortable questions about their decision not to. Because when you start to expand, it holds up a mirror to the choices they've made. And they're not ready to look in it yet. And so they push back. They question. They criticize. They express concern that sounds loving but functions as resistance. And if you keep explaining yourself to them, keep trying to bring them along, keep seeking their blessing before you move, you will be held in place by love, which is the most painful kind of captivity there is. You cannot wait for everyone to understand before you move. Some people will only understand after you've moved. So how do you actually stop? Because knowing you should stop and being able to stop are two different things. Especially when it's wired deep. Especially when explaining has been your default mode for years. Here's what I found to be true. First, you have to settle the decision before you announce it. Most people explain themselves so much because they make announcements before they've made decisions. They share the idea before it's become a conviction. And then, when someone pushes back, when someone questions it, they have no internal foundation to stand on. So they explain. They defend. They negotiate. Because inside, they haven't actually decided yet. The antidote is to decide, truly decide, before you speak. Sit with your choice until it becomes a settled thing inside you. Until the question isn't, should I do this, but how do I do this? Until the conviction is solid enough that someone else's doubt doesn't crack it. You are genuinely decided. When you've done the internal work, you'll notice that the impulse to over-explain diminishes, because you're not looking for their agreement anymore. You already have your own. Second, practice the short answer. When someone asks you about a decision, resist the pull to give the full story. Resist the impulse to preempt every objection. Give them one sentence. Clean. Simple. And then stop. I've decided to pursue this. I'm moving in a new direction. I've given it a lot of thought and I'm committed to this path. And then, silence. Let the silence stand. Don't rush to fill it. Don't take their pause as an invitation to add more. Let your one sentence carry its own weight. This will feel deeply uncomfortable at first, because your nervous system has been trained to interpret their silence as disapproval, and to respond to disapproval with more explanation. But the discomfort is the work. Sit in it. Let it pass. And you will discover something remarkable. Most of the time, the conversation simply moves on. The catastrophic reaction you were bracing for doesn't come, because most people's pushback only has power when you give it a target. When you stop providing the target, when you stop defending, there's nothing to push against. Third, redirect your need for validation. Because here's the truth. The need to explain comes from somewhere. It comes from a need to be understood, to be seen, to be approved of. And that need is human. It is not a weakness. It is part of being a person. But you've been trying to meet that need through explanation, through justification, through convincing people who may not be capable of giving you what you actually need. Redirect it. Find one person who has demonstrated that they are genuinely for you, who operates at a level you respect, who has no investment in keeping you where you are, and bring your decisions to them. Not for approval, for counsel. And learn to distinguish between the two. Approval says, "This is good. You should do it." It's about validation. Counsel says, "Here are the things I see that you might not be seeing." It's about clarity. One feeds your need to be told you're right. One helps you actually make better decisions. Choose the second. Seek less approval. Seek better counsel. Fourth, let your life speak. This is the one that requires the most patience. It's the most powerful of all. Stop explaining. Start building. Take all the energy you have been pouring into justifying your vision and redirect it toward executing it. Every hour you spend defending your dream to someone who can't see it is an hour you didn't spend building it into something they can't deny. Because here's what I know to be true. Results silence critics in a way that explanation never can. You cannot argue someone into believing in you, but you can build something so undeniable that their disbelief becomes irrelevant. Not every person will come around. Some people will watch you succeed and find a way to reframe it that keeps their original narrative intact. That's their work to do, not yours. Your work is to build, to move, to become. And to do it without stopping every 5 minutes to explain yourself to people who are standing still. Let me leave you with this. Your life is not a courtroom. And you are not on trial. You do not need to make your case to anyone. You do not need their verdict before you move. You do not need a unanimous decision before you take the next step toward the thing you were put here to do. Stop explaining yourself. not because you don't care about people, but because the highest form of respect you can show the people around you and yourself is to live your life with such clarity and such conviction that your choices speak louder than any explanation ever could. Decide, build, and let the results do the talking.